Chapter 1. The Catch. The bandages were missing again. Jane Holt stood in the supply closet of the Royal Infirmary with her hands on her hips and a clipboard she didn't need because she'd already counted twice and the number was the same both times. 14 rolls of sterile linen. She'd stocked 22 yesterday evening. She knew she'd stocked 22 because she always stocked 22. 3 rows of 7, plus 1 spare she tucked behind the tinctures where Bess wouldn't use it for practice wrapping on the training dummy she'd named Gerald. 8 rolls. Gone. Not borrowed, not requisitioned, not signed out on the ledger she'd instituted 6 months ago, specifically because supplies kept vanishing and she'd assumed it was the junior healers being careless. It was not the junior healers being careless. The junior healers were terrified of her supply ledger. Bess had once woken her at midnight to confess she'd used an extra length of gauze on a kitchen burn. This was something else. Jane pulled the ledger from its hook on the wall and flipped back through 6 months of meticulous entries. Every withdrawal accounted for, every name, every date, every quantity. And yet the closing counts never matched the opening counts. The gap was always between 4 and 10 units, always overnight. Always the same items: linen bandages, wound seal salve, the strong antiseptic she brewed herself because the standard formula was, in her professional opinion, adequate at best. Someone was stealing from her, and they had excellent taste. You could just set a trap, the quiet part of her mind suggested, the part that noticed things before she decided to notice them, the part that had been tracking this pattern for weeks with a patience Jane herself did not possess. "I don't set traps," Jane said under her breath. "I'm a healer." "You're angry. Those are your bandages." She was angry. Those were her bandages. Jane locked the supply closet, pocketed the key, and followed the only lead she had, the corridor that connected the infirmary to the east wing of the palace, where the gap between her supply counts and reality had been growing for 25 months. The east wing, where the king's private quarters were. She had never been summoned to the king's quarters, not once, in 2 years of service as royal healer to the pack of Blackwell. She had treated every warrior in the garrison, every elder with winter-stiff joints, every pup who'd fallen out of a tree. She had treated Perry Graves for a cracked rib he'd gotten, breaking up a fight between 2 betas over a card game. She had treated the kitchen staff, the stable hands, and once, memorably, a visiting ambassador's wolf who had an allergic reaction to the palace soap. She had never treated the king. Alpha King Tristan Blackwell came to council meetings with his sleeves down and his posture perfect, and not a single entry in her patient records. In 2 years, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom had never so much as asked her for a headache remedy, which was, she had recently begun to suspect, statistically impossible. The door to his private study was ajar. That was the first wrong thing. Tristan Blackwell did not leave doors ajar. She'd been in enough council sessions to know he was the kind of man who closed doors fully, who placed his chair at a precise distance from the table, who held himself with the particular stillness of someone who had decided exactly how much space he was going to take up and would not be taking up more. She pushed the door open. He was on the floor, not dramatically, not sprawled. He was sitting with his back against the desk and his legs extended, and his left hand pressing a wad of her bandages. Her very specific bandages, against a wound on his right side that was bleeding through the linen and onto a shirt that had probably cost more than her quarterly salary. His right hand held a needle. He was stitching himself. The stitch work was atrocious. Around him, arranged with a care that bordered on organizational, were 7 rolls of her sterile linen, 2 jars of her wound seal salve, a bottle of her antiseptic 3/4 empty, a second needle threaded and waiting, a bowl of water that had gone pink. 2 years of stolen supplies, laid out like a field hospital maintained by someone who had read about medicine in a book and decided he understood the general concept. Jane stood in the doorway for 4 full seconds. "There is blood," her wolf observed, with the particular flatness of someone who had identified a problem and wanted nothing to do with it. A considerable amount of blood. I'll be elsewhere. Then the professional part of her brain caught up with what she was looking at, and it was furious. Something shifted behind her expression, behind the clinical assessment, and for a half-second her eyes caught the lamplight wrong. A flicker of amber at the edges of the brown that was there and gone before she blinked it away. Your Majesty. Tristan looked up, his eyes, dark, steady, the kind of eyes that gave nothing away in council, did something she had never seen them do before. They widened. Just barely. Just enough. His wolf registered her presence and immediately updated its assessment. She's here, in our room. We are doing extremely well. Healer Holt. His voice was level. His hand did not move from the wound. This isn't what it looks like. Jane walked into the room, crouched beside him, and removed the needle from his hand with the precise, unhurried authority of someone who had been removing sharp objects from patients' hands since she was 17. It looks like you've been stealing my supplies and performing surgery on yourself for 2 years. It's not surgery. It's maintenance. You used a blanket stitch on a lateral wound. That's not maintenance. That's embroidery. She knows stitch types, his wolf observed with deep satisfaction. She's extraordinary. How long? Jane asked. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at the wound, a clean slash, probably 3 hours old, deep enough to still be bleeding, which meant deep enough that his wolf healing hadn't closed it. She pulled on gloves from the kit she kept in her belt. She always kept a kit in her belt, and began cleaning the area with motions that were practiced, efficient, and completely devoid of the gentleness she would normally use. He deserved the sting. How long what? How long have you been doing this? His jaw tightened. Not a tell he'd have allowed in council. Occasionally. I have 25 months of supply discrepancies that say otherwise. You've been tracking the supplies? I'm a healer. I track everything. She applied antiseptic. He didn't flinch, which annoyed her, because the antiseptic was the strong formula, and it should have stung considerably. Every warrior in this pack comes to me, every single one, except you. Her hands, his wolf said, with the quiet certainty of someone stating a natural law. Her hands are on us. This was worth the bleeding. It was not worth the bleeding. Tristan knew this objectively, but the part of him that had watched her across council tables for 2 years, that had memorized the way she rolled her sleeves to the elbow when she was working, that had once rearranged a border patrol schedule so he wouldn't have to explain a gash on his forearm, that part did not care about objectivity. He had liked her from the first day. She'd walked into the great hall with a medical kit over one shoulder and told his head of staff that the infirmary ventilation was a health hazard and she'd need it fixed by Tuesday. She hadn't asked, she'd told. And then she'd looked directly at him, not through him, not at his title, at him, and said, Your Majesty, your pack's medical records are 6 years out of date. I'll need access to the archive. He'd given her the archive. He'd have given her the castle. And then he'd realized, with a slow dawning horror that his wolf had found very amusing, that he could never let her see him wounded. Because wounded meant flinching. Wounded meant the particular animal vulnerability of being in pain in front of someone whose opinion mattered more than it should. Wounded meant her hands on him, and if her hands were on him, he was going to say something he couldn't take back. So he'd stolen her bandages instead. In retrospect, this had not been a good plan. I'm putting you on mandatory daily treatment, Jane said, tying off the new suture. Proper running stitch, clean, tight, correct. Starting tomorrow. You will come to the infirmary at 7 in the morning. You will sit. You will let me examine you. You will not bring your own needle. That seems excessive. You have 3 partially healed fractures in your left hand that someone set wrong. You have scar tissue on your shoulder that suggests at least 2 infections you treated yourself. And your stitching, she held at the length of thread she'd removed. This is embroidery floss. She's magnificent, his wolf said. From the doorway came a knock. Perry Graves leaned against the frame, arms crossed, face arranged in the particular expression of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "I told him," Perry said to Jane. "I told him you'd find out." Jane looked at Perry, then at Tristan, then at the organized array of stolen medical supplies arranged around the Alpha King of Blackwell like a sad, meticulous little pharmacy. "He's a good man," her wolf said quietly. "He's also an idiot. Both of these are true." 7 o'clock, Jane said. "Tomorrow. Don't be late." She left. She did not look back. Behind her, Tristan sat on the floor of his study with his side properly stitched for the first time in 2 years, and the faint, specific scent of her, clean linen and dried rosemary, and something warm underneath, settling into the room like it planned to stay. "That went well," his wolf said. "She touched our ribs. We are practically married." Chapter 2. The Worst Patient. Morning late, not dramatically late, not late enough to be an act of defiance, late by exactly 4 minutes, which was the specific amount of lateness that communicated, "I am here because I choose to be, not because you ordered me." Jane recognized this because she had treated warriors for 20 years, and every single one of them thought they'd invented the 4-minute delay. She was reorganizing the suture tray when he walked in. He filled the doorway in a way that was not quite normal, too still, too aware of where his shoulders were in relation to the frame. He was wearing a training shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and the bruising on his forearms was visible from across the room. "You're late. I'm the king. You're my patient. Sit." He sat on the examination table. The table was built for wolves. Reinforced frame, wide surface, padded leather. Tristan sat on it like it was a throne, which Jane supposed was the only way he knew how to sit on anything. "Take off the shirt." He paused. Something shifted behind his eyes, the briefest flicker of gold at the edges of the brown, there and gone, before she could be sure she'd seen it. "She wants the shirt off. We should comply immediately. We should comply with everything she ever asks, forever." Tristan pulled the shirt over his head. Jane had seen wounded bodies her entire career. She had clinical detachment the way most people had small talk. Automatic, professional, reliable. She looked at Tristan Blackwell's bare torso, and her clinical detachment briefly excused itself from the room. He was carved from work, not vanity. The muscle was functional, the kind that came from swinging a sword and running borders and hauling things that needed hauling. But underneath the surface, and this was where her professional fury reignited, there was a map of self-treated injuries that made her want to sit down. 3 scars on the left side that had healed thick because nobody had applied wound seal during the critical window. A faded infection track on the right shoulder where the skin had an undertone of silver, old damage, poorly managed. The left hand showed the telltale slight crook of fingers that had been broken and set by someone who did not know what they were doing. "There is scarring," her wolf noted, "old scarring, from infections, that he treated himself, while you were 50 yards down the corridor." Jane's jaw tightened. She put on her gloves. "I'm going to examine the shoulder first." "The shoulder is fine." "The shoulder has a 6-inch scar with secondary infection damage. That is not fine." "It healed. It healed wrong." "She's touching the shoulder," his wolf noted. "This is the greatest day of our life." Jane's hands moved over the scar tissue with professional precision. She pressed. He didn't flinch. She pressed harder. He didn't flinch. She found the knot of poorly healed tissue buried under the surface and pressed directly on it, and his breath changed. Not a flinch, but a catch. A half-second interruption in the controlled rhythm he'd been maintaining. "That hurt," she said. "No. Your breathing changed." "I was thinking about something." "You were thinking about the fact that it hurt." "She noticed our breathing," his wolf said, deeply pleased. "She is paying very close attention to our body. This is medically necessary and also perfect." Jane documented the shoulder in her notes. She would need to do deep tissue work on the scar to break up the adhesion. 3 sessions minimum. She wrote this down with the calm efficiency of someone who was not thinking about the fact that deep tissue work on the shoulder meant sustained contact with skin over bone, and that Tristan Blackwell ran approximately 4 degrees warmer than any patient she'd ever touched. Wolves ran warm. She knew this. She'd treated hundreds. None of them had been him. "Your hands are doing a thing," her wolf observed from somewhere behind Jane's professionalism. "A slight tremor. Intermittent. I'm sure it's medical." She examined the ribs. 2 were tender on the left side, not cracked, but recently bruised enough to still be healing. Wolf healing would clear these in another day. She noted them anyway. "How did these happen?" "Training." "Training with whom?" "Myself." "You bruised your own ribs. Training alone." "I'm very dedicated." The session lasted 40 minutes. Jane documented everything, every old scar, every compensation pattern, every place his body had healed around damage instead of through it, because nobody had been there to treat it properly during the window that mattered. By the end, she had 3 pages of notes and a quiet, burning anger that she kept below the surface. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Is that necessary?" "I have 3 pages of findings, Your Majesty. We'll be doing this for a while." He nodded, put his shirt back on, paused at the door. "Healer Holt." "Yes?" "The antiseptic, the one you brew yourself." He was looking at the wall just past her left shoulder. "It's better than the standard formula, significantly." Then he left. "That was a compliment," her wolf said, "about antiseptic." "This is what passes for romance in this castle. I'm going to need a moment." On the 4th day, she found his stitches on her tray, neatly cut and coiled. He'd removed them overnight, her professional sutures, with what she could only assume was a pair of scissors and a complete disregard for the phrase, "leave them in for 7 days." When Tristan arrived at 7, on time today, which somehow made it worse, Jane held up the coiled stitches. "Explain." "They were itching. Stitches itch. That means they're working." "I have a high sensitivity to..." "You have a high sensitivity to being treated by someone who knows what she's doing. That's what you have." From the corner of the room, Bess Calloway, who had been pretending to organize tongue depressors for the last 10 minutes, made a sound like a small animal being stepped on. "If you re-examine the wound, there will be blood," her wolf noted, preemptively. "I want that on record. I flagged it." Jane examined. No infection. His wolf healing had sealed the surface cleanly enough, though the underlying tissue wasn't as tight as it would have been with the full suture course. "You set my recovery back by 2 days. 2 days seems manageable. For you, not for the tissue." "Is the tissue filing a complaint?" Something in her, the part that did not want to find him funny, the part that had built a careful professional wall around the fact that he smelled like wood smoke and cold pine, nearly cracked. She held it. Bess appeared again. "Jane, I was putting away the supply delivery and I wanted to ask, is there a reason the King's private supply closet has your bandage brand in it? Because I was bringing him the joint tonic yesterday and I noticed the shelf, and it's all your stock. The ones with the blue thread? You're the only one who uses blue thread." The room went very still. Tristan looked at the wall. Jane looked at Tristan. Bess looked between them with the slowly dawning expression of someone who had just detonated something without meaning to. "Thank you, Bess," Jane said. "Close the door on your way out." Bess closed the door, then opened it again. Is this a... I'll just be..." She closed the door. Jane pulled off her gloves, slowly, one finger at a time. "This wasn't carelessness," she said. "You didn't grab the wrong supplies in the dark. You built a system. You maintained it for 2 years. You stocked your own quarters with my specific formulations, the ones I brew myself, the ones that aren't available from any other supplier. And you treated yourself with them, rather than walk 50 yards down a corridor and let me do my job." Tristan said nothing. "Why?" His wolf went quiet. The way a wolf goes quiet when something real is happening, and the usual noise of living would be disrespectful. "Tell her," his wolf said. Simply, without embellishment. He didn't. Because I could manage it, he said instead. The injuries were manageable. Wolf healing handled most of it. The rest was maintenance. Maintenance, Jane repeated. You call embroidery floss and a blanket stitch maintenance. I call it sufficient. Your left hand is crooked because you set your own broken fingers, Your Majesty. That is not sufficient. That is a man who would rather cause himself permanent damage than let someone help him. And I need to understand why. Because right now the only explanation I have is that you don't trust your own healer. And if that's the case, you should have replaced me 2 years ago instead of stealing my bandages. She thinks we don't trust her, his wolf said. And for the first time, the smugness was gone. That's wrong. Fix it. It isn't about trust, Tristan said. Then what is it about? He looked at her, not at the wall, at her, and something in his expression, in the gold at the edges of his irises, in the particular quality of his stillness, was not managed. Was not the Alpha King of Blackwell considering his words. Was just Tristan, sitting on an examination table with his shirt off and his carefully maintained distance suddenly not nearly enough. You should re-examine the shoulder, he said. The adhesion you found. It's been worse this week. It was the most obvious deflection she had ever witnessed. She let him have it. Because her wolf was saying something she did not want to hear right now. You know why, her wolf said. You've known since session 1. You're a healer. You read bodies. And his body has been saying something very specific every time you touch him. And you have been professionally ignoring it because you are stubborn, and I am tired. She was stubborn. Her wolf was tired. She re-examined the shoulder. Chapter 3. The Real One. 3 weeks in, and Tristan Blackwell was the worst patient Jane had ever had. He argued dosages. He questioned the temperature of poultices. He once brought a book on herbal pharmacology to a session and cited a passage at her that had been outdated for 30 years. And when she told him it was outdated, he'd said, "The principles are sound." And she'd had to leave the room for 90 seconds to avoid saying something she would enjoy too much. He still removed his stitches overnight. Every time. She'd tried silk thread, catgut, and the reinforced linen she usually saved for deep muscle tears. He removed them all. She'd started documenting the removals in his chart with a note that read, "Patient continues to demonstrate unauthorized suture extraction. Compliance, 0. Prognosis, insufferable." He'd read the chart. She knew because the next morning he'd arrived with the faintest trace of something at the corners of his mouth, the one that meant he'd found something funny, and would rather sustain a second wound than let her see it. He read the chart, her wolf observed. He liked it. You wrote insufferable in a medical document, and he liked it. I don't know what to do with either of you. But the sessions had shifted. She could feel it in the air, in the way his breathing changed when she touched the shoulder, in the way he'd started arriving at 6:50 instead of 7, in the way Perry had stopped checking on them after the first week and now simply nodded at Jane in the corridors, with the exhausted relief of a man who'd been carrying a secret for too long and was glad it wasn't his anymore. On the 18th session, she discovered he'd been reading her published work. She found the paper, her certification thesis on inflammatory response in wolf-accelerated tissue repair, the one she'd written under Marsh, the one that had exactly 4 citations in the academic literature, because wolf medicine was a small field and nobody read the journals, tucked inside the outdated pharmacology book he kept bringing to sessions. He had marked passages. He had written notes in the margins. One of the notes said, "Contradicts Marsh on concentration. She's right." "You've been reading my thesis," Jane said. Tristan's hand, which had been resting on the examination table, with the carefully maintained casualness of a man who was very aware of how close her fingers were, went still. "I was researching." "You were reading my thesis, which you hid inside a different book so I wouldn't see it. And you've been citing the outdated book at me in sessions while secretly agreeing with my actual published conclusions in the margins." "This is not going well," his wolf observed. Then, after a beat, Actually, she's holding the thesis. She's holding something we read carefully and wrote notes in. She is holding evidence of our attention. This is going extremely well. The principles of the older text are still, "You wrote 'she's right' in the margin, Your Majesty," in pencil, next to the paragraph about antiseptic concentration, the exact paragraph that proves the formula you've been questioning for 3 weeks is correctly dosed. His mouth did something she caught. He caught her catching it. "He's been reading your work," her wolf said. "In secret. Making notes. Agreeing with you in private and arguing with you in public, because the arguing keeps you in the room. This is the most ridiculous man I have ever lived adjacent to, and I include the ambassador's wolf who ate the soap." She put the thesis down on the tray. She did not give it back. She told herself this was because it was evidence of the dosage argument being conducted in bad faith, and not because the pencil notes in his careful handwriting made something behind her sternum ache in a way that was not medical. The border trouble had been building for weeks. The Southern pack, Aldridge, old grievance, territorial dispute that had been smoldering since Tristan's father's time, had been pushing scouts closer to the boundary markers. Not an invasion, not yet. A pressure campaign designed to force a response and then use the response as justification. Tristan rode out with Perry and 6 of his best on a cold morning that smelled like rain. Jane had heard about it from Bess, who had heard about it from the stable hand, who had heard about it from Perry's mate, who was furious that Perry hadn't told her himself. "He's riding to the border," her wolf noted. "I hope there's no blood. I hope there's no blood. I hope—" "There's always blood at the border," Jane said quietly. "Yes, that's what I was afraid of." Jane went about her day. She treated a beta with a sprained wrist. She restocked the supply closet, all 22 rolls, though the habit of checking the count had lost its investigative purpose and become something else, a mourning ritual connected to a man who used to steal from her and now showed up instead. She reorganized her field kit. She told herself she was reorganizing it because reorganizing was good practice, not because the border was 40 miles south and the man who argued her dosages was riding toward it. He came back at dusk. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps in the corridor. Not his usual measured pace, but slower, heavier, with a drag on the left side that she identified before she had time to hope she was wrong. He appeared in the infirmary doorway, upright, still in his patrol leathers, and holding his left side, with both hands pressed flat in the way that meant he was applying pressure, not resting. "Healer Holt." His voice was level, his face was pale. "Sit down." If you say fine, I will put that in your chart too." He sat. She cut the leather away from the wound, and the professional part of her mind, the part that had carried her through 12 years of trauma work without flinching, looked at what was underneath and went very still. Deep. Not a slash, a puncture, angled upward, the kind that came from close combat with someone who knew what they were doing. The bleeding was steady and dark, which meant it had gone past the muscle wall, and wolf healing wasn't closing it. This was the kind of wound that needed a healer, or it didn't heal. The kind that, left another 3 hours, would have— She didn't finish the thought. "Blood," her wolf said faintly. "Significant blood. I am going to be very far away internally while you handle this. You are doing important work. I support you from a distance." Jane worked, cleaned the wound, packed it, applied her strongest antiseptic, the one he'd been stealing for 2 years, the one he'd complimented once, the one he'd secretly agreed was correctly dosed in pencil in the margin of her thesis. She stitched it closed with the running suture she could do in her sleep, tight and clean and right. He did not argue the dosage. He did not question the method. He did not reach for the needle himself. He just sat and let her work. Halfway through, he noticed something about her that he had never seen in 3 weeks of daily sessions. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, but the rest of her was not quite still. There was a tension in her jaw, a set to her shoulders, and when she leaned close to examine the stitch line, her scent shifted. the clean linen and rosemary sharpening into something fiercer underneath, something that smelled like protectiveness and fury, and the particular animal focus of a wolf that had identified a threat to something it cared about. She didn't know she was doing it. He could tell because she would have been mortified. His hand found the edge of the table near her hip, not touching her, just there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. His wolf was quiet, not smug, not narrating, just present, in the way the animal part of a mind is present when something real is happening. She's here, it said. Once. That's enough. Jane tied off the final suture. She checked his pulse. Strong, steady, a little fast. She checked his eyes. The gold at the edges was bright, which meant his wolf was close to the surface, which meant he was in more pain than he was showing. No riding for a week, she said. No training, no lifting. I'm going to check this every morning, and if you remove these stitches, Tristan, I will find you and I will re-stitch them while you are sleeping. It was the first time she had used his name. They both knew it. The arguing is easier, he said. Quiet. Not a deflection this time. A confession. The managed mode dropping for one sentence, and underneath it, something terse and undecorated and devastatingly honest. He means it, her wolf said. The sardonic edge gone. Just the observation of something true. He argues because the alternative is sitting in silence while you touch him, and he is not equipped for that. He has never been equipped for that. He stole your bandages for 2 years rather than be equipped for that. Jane held the suture scissors. She did not look up. I know, she said. 2 words. She meant them in every direction they could point. Chapter 4. The Sidelining. The Aldridge situation escalated on a Tuesday. Perry brought the report to Tristan in the infirmary because Tristan was still on Jane's mandatory rest order and had been obeying it. He was sitting on the examination table. His table, she'd started thinking of it that way, which was a problem she was not addressing, while Jane redressed the wound. They've crossed the southern marker, Perry said. Full patrol, 12 wolves. They're holding position at the river. Tristan's body changed. Jane felt it under her hands. The shift from patient to king. The managed mode clicking into place like a door closing. How long? Since dawn. Garrett's scouts have been tracking them. Casualties? None yet. They're not engaging. They're waiting. Tristan was already standing. Jane put a hand on his chest, flat, firm, professional. Sit down. I need to. You have a puncture wound that is 4 days into a 7-day healing window. If you tear these stitches, the tissue will not rebond cleanly. I am aware of the medical implications. Then act like it. He sat, not because she'd pushed him, because the hand on his chest had communicated something that had nothing to do with medicine, and they both knew it. She touched our chest, his wolf said, voluntarily, without clinical justification. We are making significant progress despite the border crisis. He needs to sit still, her wolf countered, from behind Jane's composure. He also needs to stop being king for 5 minutes and let the stitches do their job. He will not do this. He has never done this. I have been watching this man refuse to be a body for 4 weeks, and I am exhausted. The border response was organized from the infirmary. Tristan sent Perry with the first unit. He dispatched orders through runners. He managed the crisis with the terse, precise efficiency of a king who had been handling territorial disputes since he was 22 and did not need to be standing to do it. Jane worked around him, restocking, preparing field kits, briefing Bess on trauma protocols. I'll need a field kit prepped for deployment, Jane told Bess. Full surgical, enough for 6. You're going to the border? Bess's eyes were wide. If there are casualties, they'll need a healer on site. Field treatment within the first hour is the difference between recovery and permanent damage. Jane did not see Tristan's head turn. She did not see the quality of stillness that settled over him. His wolf said one thing. No. Not smug, not confident, just the animal part of a man who had identified something he could not lose and was now facing the prospect of it walking toward danger. Tristan waited until the room cleared. Bess left to prep the kits. The last runner departed with orders. And then, in the quiet that followed, he spoke. "Healer Holt, I am reassigning you to infirmary duties for the duration of the border response." Jane stopped moving. "Bess will accompany the field unit. You'll manage the infirmary and receive wounded here." Bess is a junior healer with 8 months of practical experience. I have 12 years and field certification. Bess is capable. Bess is capable of standard wound care. If someone takes a wound like yours, like the one I am currently treating on you in case you've forgotten, she is not equipped for that level of intervention. I've made the decision. You've made the wrong decision. Tristan stood, and the thing that happened between them was not an argument. It was one side closing and the other watching it happen. "The infirmary is your post for the duration. That's an order." His voice was the council voice, the managed voice, the one that made betas straighten and elders defer, and the entire weight of the title settle into the room like stone. "He just sidelined you," Herwolf said. The sardonic edge was back, but underneath it was something rawer. "In this room, where he sits on your table, where you stitched him back together 4 days ago, where he told you the arguing was easier and you said, 'I know,' and meant it in every direction. He's doing it again, deciding what you can handle. Just like the bandages, just like the stitches, just like 2 years of bleeding alone rather than letting you close enough to help." "You could fight this," Herwolf said. She could. She could appeal to the council. She could make the correct case that she was the most qualified healer in the kingdom, and sidelining her during a crisis was not protection, it was waste. But this wasn't about the border. Jane pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time. "I resign," she said. Tristan blinked. "Effective immediately. I'll brief Bess on your treatment protocol before I leave. The sutures come out in 3 days. Don't remove them early." "You can't resign." "I just did." "I'm not accepting your resignation." "You don't have to accept it. I'm informing you of it. That's how resignation works. It's not a request." She was already moving, collecting her personal instruments from the tray, the scalpel set her mother had given her, the stethoscope she'd bought with her first commission, the small leather roll of needles she carried everywhere. Her things, not the infirmary's things, hers. She also took the thesis, the one with his pencil notes. She did not examine why. "Jane." She stopped at the door. He'd used her name. Second time. She didn't turn around. 3 days on the sutures," she said. "Don't use embroidery floss." She left. Tristan stood in the infirmary alone. The examination table was empty. Her gloves were on the tray, folded neatly, the way she always left them. The room still smelled like her. His wolf said nothing. The steady hum of confidence and romantic narration was gone, replaced by the specific quiet of an animal that knows it has made a mistake and cannot find its way back. Perry appeared 30 minutes later. He looked at the empty room, at Tristan, at the folded gloves. "She resigned?" "Yes." "You know what you just did." "I kept her safe." Perry was quiet for a long time, not the respectful silence of a beta deferring, the heavy silence of a friend who has watched someone he respects do something very stupid. "You kept her out," Perry said. "That's what you did. For 2 years, you kept her out. The supplies, the stitching, the 4 a.m. wound management, that was you keeping her out. And now you've done it the one way she can't ignore. It's the border, Perry. If she goes to the field and she's the best healer this pack has ever had. You know that. You stole her bandages for 2 years because you know that. And you just told her she's not good enough to do her job." Tristan looked at the gloves on the tray. The precise, unhurried folds of a woman who took care of things even when she was furious. even when she was leaving. "Fix it," his wolf said. The first words in an hour. No confidence, no smugness, just the animal truth stripped bare. "Fix it. She is leaving." "I can't order her back." "No," Perry agreed. "You can't." Chapter 5. The Showing Up. Jane was in the secondary treatment room when he arrived the next morning. She had not left the castle. She had moved her personal kit to the smaller room, the one used for minor cases, the one that did not have his examination table in it, and she had spent the night there, on the cot she kept for long shifts, not sleeping. She'd briefed Bess. Bess had gone to the border with the field kits, and the quiet, wide-eyed determination of a junior healer who was terrified and would not let it show. Jane had watched her go and felt something complicated settle in her chest. Pride in the healer she'd trained, and the cold, specific weight of knowing she should be walking beside her. "She'll do well," her wolf said. "She's brave. She learned from you." Then, quieter, "You should be there." At 7 o'clock exactly, the door to the secondary treatment room opened. Tristan stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his patrol leathers or his council tunic. He was wearing a training shirt with the sleeves pushed up, the same kind he'd worn to every session for 4 weeks. And his hands were at his sides, and he did not fill the doorway the way he usually did. He just stood in it. "This isn't the infirmary," Jane said, without looking up from the inventory she was updating. "I know where it is. Your treatment schedule was in the infirmary. I've transferred your file to Bess. Bess is at the border. Then you'll have to wait for her to return." Tristan crossed the room. He sat in the chair by the window, not the examination table, not the position of a patient presenting himself for treatment, just the chair, the wooden one with the uneven leg that wobbled when you leaned back. He didn't lean back. He sat upright, hands on his knees, and said nothing. Jane continued her inventory. 5 minutes passed. "I don't have an appointment with you," she said. "I resigned." "I know." "Then why are you here?" He was quiet. Then, "You said 7 o'clock, every morning. Don't be late." "I said that when I was your healer." "You said it." She looked up. He was sitting in the wobbly chair with his hands on his knees and his face open in a way she had never seen, not in council, not in the infirmary, not in any of the careful, managed interactions of 2 years. The gold at the edges of his eyes was steady, his wolf close to the surface and not hiding. "He came back," her wolf said. "He's sitting in the bad chair, the one that wobbles. He is not performing this." "I'm not here to argue," Tristan said. "I'm not here to order you back. I'm not here to explain why I did what I did, because I know why, and the reason doesn't make it right." Jane put down the clipboard. "I'm here because you told me to show up. And I've spent 2 years not showing up. Not for treatment, not for you, not for any of the things I should have been honest about from the first day you walked into this castle and told my head of staff the ventilation was a health hazard." He paused. "I kept you out. Perry was right. I kept you out because if I let you in, if I sat on that table and let you see me hurt, I was going to tell you something I hadn't earned the right to tell you. And I decided that was worse than bleeding." "He's telling her," his wolf said. Not smug, just present. "He's finally telling her." "That was a stupid decision," Jane said. "Yes. You don't get to decide what I can handle." "I know." She waited for the justification, the managed version of "I was protecting you" that would let her stay angry cleanly. He didn't give it. He just sat in the wobbly chair and looked at her with the gold in his eyes and the stillness of a man holding himself together in front of someone who could take him apart and choosing to be there anyway. "I'll be here tomorrow," Tristan said. "Same time. If you want me to leave, tell me to leave. But if you don't tell me to leave, I'll be here." He stood. He left. He came back the next morning, 7 o'clock, wobbly chair, hands on knees, said nothing. Jane changed the dressing on Abeda's training burn, did not acknowledge him. He came back the next morning, and the next. On the fourth day she spoke. "Take off your shirt." He did. She examined the border wound. The stitches were still in, all of them. He had not touched them. "You left them in," she said. "You told me 3 days. You didn't say when to remove them. I was waiting for you." He waited, her wolf said. He actually waited. "I may need to reassess everything I believe about this man." She removed the stitches. The wound had healed cleanly, better than any of his self-treated injuries. The tissue was smooth, the edges flush, the scar thin and neat. Her work. Done right because she'd been allowed to do it. Bess came back from the border on a Thursday, walking through the infirmary doors with mud on her boots and blood on her sleeves, and the particular posture of a woman who had done something she wasn't sure she could do and discovered she could. 2 casualties, Bess reported. Garrett took a slash across the back, deep but clean. I stitched it in the field. Running suture, the way you taught me. And Perry cracked 2 ribs in the second engagement. I stabilized him for transport. Jane examined Bess's field notes. The stitch work was documented. Proper technique, correct spacing, antiseptic applied at the right intervals. The rib stabilization was textbook. "The slash on Garrett," Jane said. "You used the strong antiseptic?" "Your formula, the one from the field kit. I remembered what you said about the standard being inadequate. And the rib stabilization, you racked below the fracture line?" "Below and lateral. You said wrapping across the fracture can cause secondary displacement during transport." Jane closed the field notes. She looked at Bess, exhausted, muddy, still standing, and felt something settle in her chest that was not anger and was not grief. It was pride. Specific, earned, complete pride in a healer she had trained. "She did well," her wolf said. "Quiet. You taught her well." Then, because her wolf was her wolf, "You should have been there, too." Both things are true. "Good work, Bess." Bess's face did something complicated and young. "I was scared the whole time." "That's normal." "Were you scared when you started?" "Every time." "Does it get easier?" "No. You get better at being scared and doing it anyway." Bess nodded. She looked like she wanted to cry and was not going to. "I named the field kit Gerald." "Of course you did." The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was important. There was no grand gesture, no public declaration, no single moment where everything changed. There was just Tristan in the wobbly chair every morning at 7, and Jane not telling him to leave. She reinstated herself on a Monday, not because he asked, because the infirmary was hers, and a resignation given under those circumstances was not a retreat. It was a boundary. She came back when the boundary was respected. The sessions resumed, but they were different now. He showed up, not just physically, though he did that too, every morning, on time, shirt off when she asked, stitches untouched until she removed them. He showed up in the way that mattered, honestly. When she asked how the ribs happened, he told her. Training with Perry. Real answer. When she asked about the headaches he'd been hiding, she could tell from the way he held his temples during counsel, a tell so small she was embarrassed she'd cataloged it. He said yes, since the border engagement. Worse in the mornings. She treated the headaches. She started the corrective work on his hand. 3 controlled rebreaks, proper setting, guided healing. He held still for the rebreaks, which was the bravest thing she'd ever watched him do. And when the pain peaked, he did not argue the dosage. He just looked at her with his hand in both of hers and said, "Your thesis was right about the concentration." And she had to put down the bone saw because her hands were not steady, and for once she did not pretend it was medical. "Your hands," her wolf observed, "are shaking." Because he cited your published work while you were holding a bone saw? I need you to understand how this looks from the inside. "Stop that," she said, to her wolf, out loud, in front of him. "Stop what?" Tristan asked. "Not you." His mouth did the thing. "Stop that too," she said. I didn't do anything. You did the thing, with your mouth, when you're amused. I have no idea what you're referring to. He knows exactly what you're referring to, her wolf said. He has been doing it on purpose for at least 2 weeks. I want that on record. The dosage arguments continued. They'd become something else now, not defiance, not distrust, but the particular verbal sparring of 2 people who had found the shape of each other's intelligence and couldn't stop testing it. The concentration is too high, he said one morning, while she worked on the second finger re-break. The concentration is exactly right. My research suggests. Your research is my thesis, which you agreed with in pencil. You are arguing with yourself. I have evolved my position. You have evolved your position to be incorrect. I think we need an independent review. I am the independent review. I am also the dependent review. I am the only review. Sit still. He sat still. His wolf offered a brief editorial. She told us to sit still, and we did. She is the only person in this kingdom who can make us sit still. This is relevant information that we should think about for the rest of the day. It happened on a morning that was not special. 4 months after the reinstatement. A Wednesday. Overcast. He'd come in with a gash on his forearm from a training bout, a small one, barely enough to need her, already half closed by his wolf healing. He could have handled it himself. He came to her anyway. She cleaned it, dressed it. Her hands moved over his skin with the ease of someone who had touched this man hundreds of times and intended to touch him hundreds more. This didn't need me, she said. No. You came anyway. I come every morning. For a scratch. For you. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Not a grand declaration, not a speech. Just 2 words, said in his real voice, the terse, undecorated, devastating one that came out when the managed mode dropped. Jane held his arm. His pulse under her fingers was fast, and he was not controlling it. She waited for him to take it back, to reach for the managed mode, to say something about dosage concentration, and restore the distance to its usual, carefully measured dimensions. He didn't. I have liked you, he said, since the day you told my head of staff the ventilation was a health hazard. I liked you before I knew how you took your tea. I liked you when you reorganized the archive in 3 days and sent me a memo about the state of the medical records that was the most devastating 4 paragraphs I have ever read. I liked you when you brewed a new antiseptic formula because the standard wasn't good enough. And I liked you when you argued with the council about infirmary funding and didn't notice you'd been arguing with your gloves still on. He paused. I stole your bandages because I couldn't sit in a room with you while you touched me and pretend I was made of something that doesn't feel. I argued your dosages because the arguing was easier than silence. And I was wrong. About all of it. The supplies, the stitches, the sidelining. The 2 years of deciding what you could handle instead of letting you decide. I was wrong, and I know I was wrong, and I am not asking you to forgive that. I am asking you to let me stop hiding it. The infirmary was quiet. Outside the window, the overcast sky pressed close and soft and gray. Jane held his arm and felt the pulse under her fingers beating too fast, and knew, with the specific clinical certainty of a woman who had studied bodies her entire life, that this one was telling the truth. He's telling her, his wolf said, not smug, not narrating, just present in the way that meant this was real and the wolf knew it. He's telling her everything, finally. Jane looked at the gash she'd dressed. Clean work, her work. She looked at his hand, the one she'd re-broken and set properly, the fingers that were straight now because she'd fixed them. She looked at the shoulder, the scar tissue she'd spent weeks breaking down, the infection damage she'd mapped and treated and documented in notes she'd told herself were clinical. You're the worst patient I've ever had, she said. I know. You argue dosages you know are correct. You remove stitches in the night. You brought a 30-year-old pharmacology book to a session to prove a point you'd already conceded in pencil in the margins of my thesis. I know. And you showed up. Every morning, in the wobbly chair, even when I wouldn't look at you. I know. I'm going to say something, and I need you to not do the mouth thing while I'm saying it. She's telling him, Herwolf said. The sardonic edge was gone. The exhaustion was gone. Just the quiet presence of an animal that had been waiting for exactly this. About time. I kept your thesis notes, Jane said. The pencil ones, where you agreed with me. I kept them in the drawer of my desk, next to the stethoscope my mother gave me, and the supply ledger I started because of you. I kept them because they were the first honest thing you ever showed me. She took a breath. It was not steady. She did not pretend it was steady. And I have liked you since the day you complimented my antiseptic and couldn't look me in the eye while you did it, because that was the second honest thing, and I am a healer, and I read bodies for a living, and yours has been saying something very specific every time I touch you, and I have been professionally ignoring it for 2 years, because I am stubborn and my wolf is tired of me. And I was afraid that if I stopped ignoring it, I would have to admit that the tremor in my hands every time I touch you has never, not once, been medical. Correct, Herwolf said. Quiet, on all counts. Tristan's hand turned over on the examination table, palm up. An offering. A question asked without words by a man who had spent 2 years using words to keep her at a distance, and was finished with distance. Jane took his hand, the one she'd rebroken and set properly. The one that was straight now because she'd fixed it. The fingers that curved around hers were warm and healed and right. If you ever sideline me again, she said, I will resign, and I will take the antiseptic formula with me, and you will spend the rest of your life using the standard concentration. That is the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. She leaned in, and he saw it. The gold. Not in his eyes, in hers. The amber at the edges of the brown, bright and steady and unhidden. Her wolf close to the surface and not caring that he could see it. She had spent 2 years behind clinical detachment and professional composure, and her wolf had been there the entire time, and now it was looking at him through her eyes, without apology. She kissed him. Not the forehead press she'd been giving herself permission to imagine, not the careful, clinical, proximity-adjacent contact she could have filed under professional conduct if she'd needed to lie to herself about it later. She kissed him the way a woman kisses a man she has wanted to kiss for 2 years and has finally stopped finding reasons not to. Her hands on either side of his face, the face she had examined and documented and cataloged in notes she would never show anyone. His skin under her palms, 4 degrees warmer than hers. His mouth against hers, and the small, involuntary sound he made when she leaned in, as if something he'd been bracing against for 2 years had simply given way. His hands found her waist, not pulling, holding, the way he held everything that mattered, with the specific, careful pressure of a man who understood what he was touching and would not let go of it carelessly. When she pulled back, his eyes were gold, not the flicker at the edges, the full, steady warmth of a wolf who was done pretending to be brown. Your pulse, she said. Her voice was not clinical. I know. It's very fast. I know. That's going in your chart. His mouth did the thing. She did not tell him to stop. We are doing extremely well, his wolf said. The confidence was back. Earned. We are doing extremely, impossibly, unreasonably well. Took you long enough, her wolf said. Then, quieter. Both of you. Took you both long enough. They dated for 8 months before the marking. Not because they were waiting for something, not because there was a timeline or a tradition or a rule. Because Jane had spent 2 years being kept at a distance, and she was not going to let the closing of that distance be rushed by anyone, including herself. She wanted to know him outside the infirmary. She wanted to know what he was like when he wasn't bleeding, or arguing, or performing kingship from an examination table. She wanted to know if the man who showed up in the wobbly chair, was the same man who would show up at dinner, at the market, in the garden on a Sunday, when nothing was wrong and nobody needed healing, and the only reason to be together was that they wanted to be. He was. He was quieter outside the infirmary, if that was possible. He walked beside her without talking, and it was comfortable. He learned which herbs she needed before she asked. He brought her tea on long shifts and left it on the tray without interrupting her work. He still argued the dosages. She let him, because the arguing had become something she kept the way she kept his notes, precisely, with care, because it was theirs. The Aldridge situation resolved 3 weeks after Bess came back, a border treaty that cost Tristan 2 territorial concessions and a formal apology he composed at Jane's desk while she brewed antiseptic beside him. He didn't ask for her opinion on the wording. She gave it anyway. The final draft was better for it. The pack saw it before either of them named it. Perry stopped looking exhausted and started looking like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and could finally put it down. Bess, who had been terrified of Tristan for her entire career, discovered that the Alpha King would hold a door open for anyone carrying a medical kit, and would also eat an entire plate of the terrible biscuits Bess baked for the infirmary staff without complaint, because Jane had baked them with her, and Tristan would eat anything Jane's hands had touched. The council noticed that the king arrived at meetings differently now, not softer, not less, but settled in a way he hadn't been before. The way a man is settled when he has stopped carrying something alone and let someone else help him bear the weight of it. The marking was quiet. Not in the infirmary, in the garden behind the palace, at dusk, where they walked most evenings because the infirmary smelled like antiseptic and the garden smelled like the cold pine and rosemary that had become the specific scent of them together. He'd brought her there because she'd been on her feet for 14 hours treating a wave of winter fever cases, one of the wolf-specific illnesses, the kind that didn't respond to human medicine and required her particular expertise. And she was tired in a way that went past the body. He didn't say anything. He just walked beside her. And when she leaned into him, not a collapse, not a dramatic moment, just the quiet sideways press of a woman who had been standing alone for a very long time and was choosing, finally, not to. He caught her weight and held it like it was the easiest thing he'd ever done. She turned her face into his neck, breathed him in, and then her teeth found the place where his neck met his shoulder, the place she'd treated scar tissue, the place she'd broken up adhesions with deep tissue work, the place she knew better than any healer in the kingdom, because she had spent months learning the specific geography of his damage and repairing it with her hands. She bit down. Not hard, not performative. The deliberate press of teeth into skin that said, mine, in a language older than words. The bond hit him like a held breath finally released. Not a new thing, just the thing that had been building for months, given a name and a permanence it hadn't had before. He turned his mouth to the curve of her neck. She tilted her head, and the small, deliberate offering of it, the trust of bearing that specific vulnerability to a wolf, to this wolf, undid something in him he hadn't known was still held together. His teeth pressed into her skin, gentle and certain, and the bond between them completed, a single clear note where there had been 2. His wolf said nothing, held the moment, let it be. Her wolf managed one observation before the bond settled into both of them like a frequency they'd been tuned to all along, and could only now hear clearly. Good. Now stop getting hurt. Familiar sounds, a drawer opening and closing, Luna and Healer. The titles sat together the way they sat together in her. Not competing, not compromising, just 2 true things about the same woman. She kept the infirmary. Bess was a full healer now, not a junior, field certified, confident, still naming equipment after Gerald. He kept showing up at 7. He still argued dosages. She still wrote insufferable in his chart. He still stole her bandages. Not because he needed them, because he left notes. And the notes said things like, borrowed, will return. The concentration is still too high, and she kept every single one in the drawer of her desk, next to the thesis with his pencil marks. Because she was a healer, and she kept things that mattered precisely, with intention, in a place where she thought he wouldn't notice. He noticed. She keeps them, his wolf said, on a morning when he arrived at 6:50 and found her reading the latest note before she tucked it away. She keeps our notes the way she keeps everything, precisely, with care, in a drawer where she thinks we can't see. We see everything. We have always seen everything. We have been paying attention since the day she walked in and told the head of staff the ventilation was a health hazard. We are doing extremely well.